not going to be properly counted. But yes, of course they're going to get counted, and voters should exercise those options where they have them. Counties in Colorado are going to be providing that option for some in certain counties, and they should exercise that.
How can you practice voting? That may sound odd, but we are seeing the largest number of new voters, I think, in history registered. These machines are not easy or obvious.
No, they're not. And in fact, many poll workers, unfortunately, don't even know how to work them and what to do when they break down. I mean, the other whole piece of this is when a machine breaks down, you know, arguably the machine should be taken out of commission, not waiting for a technician for hours and to come and then somehow fix it when you don't even know whether it's actually been fixed. But, you know, beyond that, there's this basic point that citizens need to be engaged in overseeing the political process, in being vigilant about protecting the right to vote. That's why we're engaged with a national group of partners with us in monitoring this election, Watch the Vote 2008. And we really believe that citizen oversight is one of the true antidotes to encouraging and protecting the process. Well, it means that citizens are engaged at the local level, that they're monitoring their polling site, that they're showing up when there are problems, that they're responding to issues that they hear from either hotlines or from the local community, and that they're demanding of their election officials greater oversight. Most of these states do not audit the process, and yet we audit our financial transactions, we audit other things of value, we audit the most important thing of value, which is our vote.
I'm curious, you may not have the answer to this, but seeing as this problem crops up with so many other issues in American society, do you know to what degree the American companies that are producing these machines have begun penetrating the voting markets in other countries? In other words, in the third world and other places where they're now voting with the same kinds of machines? Some
of these companies are engaged in doing that in other parts of the world. And in fact, you know, there needs to be a full investigation of these voting systems companies. We've called for that. There is no real oversight at the federal level of these companies. They've marketed, frankly, a defective product in these electronic voting machines to the tune of making billions of taxpayer dollars. The state of Ohio has sued Diebold, one of these voting machine manufacturers, to return the tens of millions of taxpayer dollars provided to that company for marketing a defective product in an electronic voting machine. And we ought to have Congress intervene here. If, in fact, these companies knowingly marketed a defective product, then that's commercial fraud, and they ought to be held accountable for that as well.
This latest news of Acorn revising the tally from a major national voter registration drive from 1.3 million, saying they registered, down to 450,000, and the whole attack on Acorn, with John McCain saying it's the largest voter fraud perpetrated in American history.
This is a red herring. This is a total red herring. The fact of the matter is that whether or not there are fraudulent voter registration forms being submitted by some people who decide they weren't going to do the work and fill out Mickey Mouse doesn't mean that Mickey Mouse is showing up to vote on Election Day. There's no evidence whatsoever that that's going to be happening. In fact, there's very little evidence that any of these kinds of claims of voter fraud actually occur. When you know, you look at the overall prosecutions on this, it's 0.00001% of people who actually are showing up and committing a felony right there on Election Day by saying, I'm somebody that I'm not. It doesn't happen.
Do you need an ID to vote?
Well, it depends on what state you're in. I mean, in certain states you do, and if you're a new registrant, then you do in certain states. But
what kind of ID?
A photo ID, unfortunately, in some states. I mean, the fact is that some of these states have imposed a very restrictive requirement.
What kind of photo ID?
You know, a driver's license depends. I mean, a lot of people don't have them. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of people not being able to cast the franchise because of those voter ID requirements. But here's the bottom line, is that this election is only going to be decided by those who are able to access the ballot and to have their votes counted. If you show up on Election Day, you're eligible to vote, you're supposed to be on the voting rolls, but you've been purged, you've been taken off, and you don't get a ballot, you won't decide this election. And if you show up on Election Day and you vote on one of these voting machines and it doesn't possibly count your vote, then you won't decide this election. So whatever polls are out there, the most important point is that it gets decided by people who are able to vote and have their votes counted.
John Bonifaz, thanks so much for being with us. Legal Director of Voter Action, also the founder of National Voting Rights Institute, actually ran for Secretary of State of the state of Massachusetts. Thanks so much for being with us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. When we come back, the death date has been set for Troy Davis in Georgia. He's scheduled to die on Monday. We'll talk about his case. Stay with us. Thanks.
It all began when they took me from my home and put me on death row.